Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. This weekend, the Labour tribes gather here in Liverpool in what could be their last jamboree before a general election. Their tails are up after a crushing by-election victory in Scotland. But it isn't the Labour Party if there isn't a quarrel brewing. This time it's about whether Labour's leader should be bolder and whether he's got enough time to convince the voters that he's got what it takes. But before we get into all that, let's turn to the grim news from Israel. The ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, joins us from Givat Shmuel now. Good morning, Ambassador.
Good morning, Trevor.
Can you bring us...
I can't hear you.
Can you bring us up to date on... if you can hear me, can you bring us up to date on what you understand to be happening on the ground right now?
Well, Trevor, let's start with what happened yesterday. Yesterday morning, we all woke up here in Israel to a nightmare. London is a city that is experienced with terror attacks. There was the London Bridge attack. Manchester had the Manchester Arena attack. But multiply all those terror attacks to the big numbers that created over 1,000 Israelis in hospitals, 300 Israelis brutally, barbarically murdered in cold blood by Hamas terrorists that planned in the most calculated way to invade Israel from the air, from the ground, and from the sea, and created the hardest day Israelis ever experienced in their lifetime. I was there. I must say, I experienced many terror attacks. This is not another terror attack. This is a situation where people couldn't be safe in their own homes. Cities were invaded. We're talking about terrorists going from one house to another and brutally targeting children. We're talking about young children being taken away from their parents to Gaza, young women that we saw the videos. Trevor, I don't know how much you've seen from all those clips being on social media yesterday from elderly people, people with dementia that were hijacked or taken hostage to Gaza by Hamas terrorists. And this is the reality that Israelis woke up into yesterday. And this is the time of every country to defend itself and to the international community to support Israel's right to defend its children, women, and elderly that were targeted yesterday by Hamas.
We have indeed been watching some of what we've been able to show. As you might imagine, we haven't been able to show everything that has been seen by Sky's reporters, but it is indeed horrific. We understand this morning that rockets have been fired at the other end of Israel by Hezbollah. What do you think is happening there? Is this coordinated? Is this a new front?
Well, first of all, we are ready to the North Front. Yesterday, both the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister were preparing our army troops to be ready to both fronts of Israel, south and north. But at the moment, the main war is with Hamas. So Hamas sponsored and being a proxy of Iran, make a big mistake yesterday by getting into Israeli cities and villages and taking over 100 people hijacked to Gaza Strip. And our first and main responsibility is to bring back these people alive. Most of them are young kids. Some of them are elderly people, as I mentioned before, and we are talking about people that families are torn apart from this horrific events yesterday. One of the things I want to say is that Israel's duty here to defend its people is something that all the international community must respect. And we've seen Prime Minister Sunak support Israel yesterday. We've seen President Biden's declaration that the US stands with Israel. And we need to make sure that no matter how long this war takes, the international community understands that Israel doesn't have another choice. We need to defend our children and people.
I want to come to the international community in a moment, but I just want to ask you about Israel's immediate response today. Can we expect, I know you can't talk to us about the military details, but can we expect to see Israeli Defense Force troops in Gaza, which I think would be the first time in nearly a decade that that's happened?
I'm not getting into the military tactics. I would like to say what are the main aims of this war, and it's a war. I mean, you need to understand. Many people are saying, "Well, the Israelis are fighting again." No, it's a new level. It's another scale. We never experienced a situation where main cities in Israel, in the south part of Israel, think about Bristol here in the UK, being taken over, invaded by terrorists, and the terrorists walking from one house to another. I've seen yesterday sights I've never seen as Israeli. I've seen mothers crying when their children being taken away from them. I've seen this father that lost connection to his wife and his daughters, and he realized by calling and identifying his phone is being hijacked and taken to Gaza. So we are talking about situations where terrorists walked into the living room of people in Israel and started targeting families one by one, and those families felt they're being butchered by this horrible, horrific Hamas terrorists. And this is the situation where we need to make sure it will never happen again, and the infrastructure of Hamas will be totally, totally destroyed.
Ambassador, when you say you are at war, this suggests something more than a policing action. What exactly will that mean? And what would be your war aims here? Is this the end of the arrangement between Israel and Gaza's self-governing proposition?
Well, from 2005, Israel left Gaza Strip. So the Palestinians got their 100% ability to control the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, instead of using all the international support to build a flourishing city, we've seen Hamas terror organization using and abusing all this support to create a terror city, to create evil city, and to create a place that the only thing they want to achieve is to destroy Israel and to kill innocent people in Israel. And this is the reason why our first aim is, first of all, to bring back those people that have been taken hostage. We're talking over 100 people that are hostage at the moment in Gaza Strip, and Israeli families don't know where they are. And I've seen the horrible photographs and the videos coming from those people being taken to Gaza. And this is our duty to our people. And the second thing, of course, is to make sure Hamas will never commit those crimes again.
Ambassador, it wouldn't just be the leaders of Hamas who would say what I'm about to put to you. They would say, of course, since 2005, there's been formal, if you like, autonomy for Gaza. But in truth, access to and from Gaza, trade in and out of Gaza has entirely been controlled by Israel itself. This isn't a separate, independent outfit. And so when you say they failed to build something flourishing, I think some people would ask, actually, it's not entirely their own failure.
Well, absolutely 100% their own failure, because we're talking here about a place that got massive support from the international community, and they built tunnels underneath Gaza. They used all this money to build tunnels to make sure that Israel will be under attack. All those rockets being fired yesterday, we're speaking about over 3,000 rockets. This is what Hamas has done with the power the international community gave them. And I must say again, Israel doesn't want war, but we are in a necessity to a war because we need to protect our children. And I must tell you as a mother that my daughter was asking me yesterday why they want to kill us. And my answer was, you're right, you're a child. It doesn't make sense. But the truth and the reality is those barbaric terrorists want to kill children, and we need to protect them.
Ambassador, one last point quickly. Do you detect the hand of Iran in this?
Absolutely. Iran is backing up Hamas. Iran is destabilizing all the region through its proxies, both Hamas and Hezbollah. And I think the Prime Minister's statement yesterday was clear. We are willing to take a long fighting time in order to defend our people, but we need to make sure that no one will have any motivation to do that again, because
May-
Israel is a strong country.
May I just ask one last question, which will be important to our viewers? Many of our viewers will have family in Israel. Do you have any information about the position of British nationals, whether they've been swept up in this in any way?
I know there is one British citizen that is in Gaza at the moment, and I know that Israel is doing everything to make sure all the people being kept hostage at the moment in the hands of Hamas will be released. But it's a long and complicated war, and this is where we need your support in order to make sure that every single civilian that is being taken will be brought back to Israel where they belong. And those horrible war crimes were created yesterday by Hamas by killing innocent people, that this thing will be, make sure that it will never happen again. And this is my message to you today from Israel.
Ambassador, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us this morning.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, let's get some immediate reaction from Labour here at the conference in Liverpool. Wes Streeting is the party's shadow health secretary. Hundreds dead, thousands injured. What is your reaction to this assault on Israel by Hamas?
Well, there can be no justification whatsoever for the barbarity we've seen unfolding on our television screens and social media feeds. I cannot imagine what people in Israel are going through. And when I say I can't imagine, I mean I literally cannot imagine it. The murder, the violence, the kidnapping, the parents having to explain to their children what is going on and why they are fleeing for safety. And that is why it has to be unequivocally condemned, why we unequivocally condemn the violence. And, you know, I think for the future of both Israelis and Palestinians, there is no future that involves this violence, this bloodshed. And I think for our country, for other democracies around the world, it's important that we stand with Israel, Israel's right to defend itself, and hope that in the aftermath of the bloodshed and violence we're seeing unfold on our television screens, there might still be some hope of a way through that sees both Israelis and Palestinians living with peace and security and freedom. But that future feels a long way away from what we're seeing unfolding now.
I know you know Israel well. I believe you spent a week or so last year studying the health service. How much do you think this has set back any progress towards peace in the Middle East?
I mean, I think it's early days. See how things unfold. It is hard to see how, off the back of this, you get to where I think we ought to be, which is a peace initiative, ideally one that's led by the Arab League, to bring together Israelis and Palestinians around the table to negotiate what I still believe is the only solution to this conflict in the longer term, which is the two-state solution. But it's hard to see how what we're seeing unfolding on our television screens doesn't set back that cause, that hope, that prospect for a peaceful solution where both Israelis and Palestinians can live with the freedom, the security that any of us would want to enjoy, and the hope of a better future.
Well, we shall see how this rather incredibly grim scenario unfolds. I'm sure that we'll be reporting on it for days. Of course, you have your responsibilities here, and you will be talking to the Labour conference about your plan for the health service. But before we get into that, I spoke to Labour's, I guess, biggest union donor, or the head of Labour's biggest union donor, Sharon Graham, the boss of the Unite Union. And I just wanted to show you what she said about you, really.
Okay.
I'm going to keep Labour's feet to the fire. Of course I want a Labour government. I absolutely want a Labour government, of course. But I want a Labour government that is going to make real change to people's lives. And I think at the moment, Labour are being too timid.
So, how do you respond to the suggestion that you're just too timid.
Well, let me just take the NHS as an example. We've committed to the biggest expansion of NHS staff in history to give the NHS the staff it needs to treat patients on time. We've committed to having dedicated school counsellors in every primary and secondary.
I want to come to that.
No, but this is important, Trevor, because let me just outline
I'm going to give you a chance to
scale of the
explain all
ambition.
of that.
But the big, and I'll come back on the detail, but look, just to outline the ambition. A school counsellor in every primary and secondary school in the country, community mental health hubs in every community, a plan that would create 2 million more appointments a year to get the backlog down, which we've announced this weekend, doubling the number of CT scanners and MRI scanners to get people diagnosed and therefore treated faster, a plan to create 700,000 extra dentistry appointments a year. If we delivered just one of those policies, it would be transformational in terms of people's experience of healthcare in this country. Taken together, they form the basis of a serious plan to grip the worst crisis in the NHS's history and build an NHS that's fit for the future. So we've got the ambition, we've got the plan, we've got the team, and now we've got to make our case to the country to get them to vote for it.
Let me say, I mean, I can't exactly channel Sharon Graham, but I guess what she would say if she was sitting here is, yeah, it's all very fine, but actually, big thing right now is energy, cost of living. You're not doing very much on that. What you really need to do is nationalise the electricity and gas industries, and we're not hearing anything from Labour on that scale.
We've gone one better to deliver real change for people, which is we've committed to a real windfall tax on the big oil and gas giants and their excess profits, which would deliver real help to families now in terms of the cost of living, and an ambitious plan through GB Energy and through the enormous expansion of both new nuclear and new renewables to create the energy security, the jobs, and the lower bills that Britain's crying out for. That's an ambitious plan. It's a credible plan, and it's a plan we're going to make our case to the British people to vote for.
So you're not bothered by the reports that her view is actually shared, you know, the view that you're basically a bit wet, is shared by some old Blairites like Charlie Faulkner and Alistair Campbell?
I don't think that's a fair characterisation of their views. And
you can read what they said in the newspaper yesterday.
And I think when you look at where the Labour Party was when Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party, an existential crisis for this party. Will Labour ever win again, is what people were saying. Will it even exist into the future? He's taken the Labour Party from the ashes of our worst defeat since 1935, dragged the Labour Party back to the mainstream, and has built a team and a platform that can give Britain its future back, and is building public support on a scale the Labour Party hasn't seen since it was last heading towards government.
Nobody's going to argue, I think, about the case that the Labour Party has been straightened out. Things that you were criticised for have now, in some senses, been solved. But what we're talking about today is the possibility of a Labour government. And what I think people want to know is, what does that mean? Now, you've put some flesh on the bones this weekend. You announced that you spent £171 million on new scanners for the NHS so that we can get ahead of cancers, rather like the one that you yourself unfortunately suffered from. We're hearing this morning about £1 billion, £1.5 billion to pay for extra overtime so that those scanners can actually be used. Now, the NHS has got a budget of £200 million, a staff of 1.3 million. This doesn't really match the scale of the disaster that you've been telling us about for a year that the Tories have wrought. I mean, it really is a bit of a mouse, isn't it, compared to what you've said is a terrible, terrible destruction of the NHS.
As I'm going to be outlining in my speech at conference on Wednesday, the way we make the NHS fit for the future isn't simply investment, it's reform. And I would argue reform is even more important than investment, in the sense that if you just keep on pouring ever-increasing amounts of taxpayers' money into a system that is failing, it's wasteful in every sense.
So what's the big reform? What is the big reform?
When I compare the NHS to other healthcare systems around the world, and I look at why our outcomes are so much poorer, it's because effectively we do late diagnosis, which means more expensive, less effective treatment. We've got an NHS that is effectively a hospital-based sickness service. We need to rewire the NHS so we do far more primary care and care in the community, faster diagnosis, faster access to general practice, more care in people's homes, and dealing with delayed discharge at the exit door of hospitals through social care. Unless you've got the reform argument, what you do is just pour more money into a system that isn't working, and you waste taxpayers' money.
I want to come and ask you in a minute about what you've just said about social care, but let's just deal with what you have actually said you want to do, and because I wonder if it really matches up to the task and whether you can actually do it. You know, what you said, you're going to spend this billion and a half on overtime, on weekend working and so on. We looked at the NHS's own staff survey, and here's what their staff say. 34%, 1 in 3 NHS workers, say they often or always feel burnt out because of their work. 31%, 1 in 3, say that they feel exhausted at the thought of another day's work. You are not going to get people to do overtime. This is wishful thinking.
No, the reassurance I can offer people is two.
Well, you can't offer reassurance. How are you going to... The people who have to do the work...
Well, you don't know if I can't offer reassurance. You're not giving me a chance to say it. The two reassurances I can offer is, firstly, this is not compulsion. This is voluntary. Staff will give them the choice to opt in.
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking how you're going to get people to staff those scanners.
The second reassurance is that the reason we've adopted this approach is because it's an approach that is already been shown to be working in some London hospitals. But I want to take the best performance in the NHS, the extraordinary performance in the NHS, and make it the everyday experience, the ordinary performance right across the country. We can't just have an NHS that's performing well in London. It's got to perform well for the rest of the country. It's a credible plan. It's workable. It would create 2 million more appointments a year, and that would be game-changing in terms of getting waiting lists down and busting the Tory backlog.
You're trying to sell it to me, but let me tell you what somebody else said about this, about the NHS's staff. Looking at the fact that, as Labour said, they're doing 1 million hours overtime a year last year. The country is in their debt after their astounding sacrifice and commitment during the first wave of COVID. But now, with what's likely to be the toughest winter ever seen in the NHS, they're being asked to give even more. You know who said that?
John Ashworth.
Exactly, your predecessor. He says we can't ask staff to do more. Now you're turning up and saying, oh, by the way, we want you to do even more. We want you to work at weekends. We want you to work at evenings. How are you going to make that happen?
Well, as I say, Trevor, it will be voluntary for staff. They will be paid.
And they will say,
they will be paid fairly. Some staff won't want to do it, and that's fine. The plan to deliver 2 million appointments doesn't assume anything like the majority of staff are going to be piling in to do this. What matters is that we can get the staff we need in every part of the country to help us deliver 2 million more appointments. Of course, we've also got to deal with the underlying pressures that staff are facing that are leading them to walk out on unprecedented industrial action, because the risk for the future of the NHS isn't simply they walk out for more strikes, it's they walk out of the NHS altogether. We've got a retention challenge in the NHS, not just a recruitment challenge. I get it, but this is a serious and credible plan to deliver 2 million more appointments, and I think staff will be proud to deliver those appointments. Patients will be grateful to receive them. I
want to return to what Sharon Graham said. You said this weekend that you're calling on decent Conservatives to come to Labour. They have a home in Labour, to quote you. Of course, some people in the Labour Party think that's what you really want, which is to turn the party into a comfortable place for red Tories, I think they call you. Well, like yourself.
Look, I'm very proud of the fact that the Labour Party is appealing to the country rather than repelling people. And my goodness, that change couldn't have come at a better time, really. When you look at the cranks, the crackpots and the conspiracy theorists that have taken over the Conservative Party, when you've got cabinet ministers, notionally serious cabinet ministers like Mark Harper on your programme this morning, peddling conspiracy theories as if he's been doom-scrolling TikTok, trying to find the most
I will ask him about
bonkers things to say from the conference platform. What are these people doing? And how on earth does this address the biggest crises in our country, the cost of living crisis, the NHS crisis? And here's the kicker for Rishi Sunak. He can't be the change the country needs because his government, as 13 years, has been part of the problem. Only Labour can give Britain its future back, and that's the case we're making here in Liverpool this week. We'll
see how Mark Harper reacts to being described as a bit bonkers.
Well, tell him he should apologise and tell him to get his act together and start behaving like a serious government with the little time they've got left.
Wes Streeting, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks very much.
Now, let's see what our panel this morning are going to make of what we've heard, both from Israel and also just now from Wes Streeting. Much of what we're discussing today is rather different to what we thought we'd be tackling on the first full day of a Labour conference here in Liverpool. I'm joined now by the former Labour Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, the executive editor and the head of podcasting at Politico, and McAlvoy, and the former Labour advisor and now broadcaster Aisha Hazarika. And as great professionals, they have all got themselves into their seats.
As if by magic.
At amazing speed. Can I just start with the news from Israel? We know that Israel-Palestine has always been a divisive issue. And the last time something like this happened, the response from Labour was rather muted from, let's put it that way, from Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think we're going to hear something different from Labour this week, Jackie Smith?
Well, I think we already have heard something very different from Keir Starmer in terms of his unequivocal condemnation of what are terrorist attacks, as we heard clearly as well from Wes Streeting, and his support for Israel's right to defend itself. I mean, I think, frankly, that is a world away from what Jeremy Corbyn would have said in similar circumstances.
And is this a signal that we're in different territory?
We're in very different territory, Trevor, and I think this is a sign in how strongly and how quickly the Labour leadership came out. There was clearly their decision-making was working very well, that they were all out on one page. I don't think that's the end of the story, however, because I think as Israel hits back, which it will do with some force, the question will arise, and particularly in Labour, and where there is a disagreement between the left, the centre, about how far Israel should go in response. And that is going to land right in the middle of this conference. And I think that will change the debate and the optics. And that's when the pressure will rise on Keir Starmer to hold that line. And also, how is he going to deal with people who disagree with it?
I was going to say, Aisha, the leadership seems to have been decisive. How's that going to fly on the floor of conference?
Well, look, I think the sort of complexion of the Labour Party has changed a lot. You know, when you think back to when we were gathering here in Liverpool under Jeremy Corbyn, it was a very, very different type of conference. And as, you know, my panellists have alluded to, the leadership have been so quick off the mark. It was interesting contrasting Jeremy Corbyn's tweet yesterday compared with what senior figures like David Lammy were saying. You know, I asked David Lammy yesterday, do you distance yourself? He said, absolutely, this is absolutely not the... But you are right. Look, there will be some people here that will have some sympathy for what Jeremy Corbyn says, but I think they will get pretty short shrift from the leadership of... They are watching people like a hawk on this.
Can we come back to you in just a moment, but it is just after 9 o'clock. You are watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom has told this programme that Israel is at war. She says that one Britain is in Gaza as attacks continue. Here in Liverpool at the Labour conference, the party's Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, said he unequivocally condemned the action by Hamas. And as we are at the top of the hour, let's get the very latest on the situation in the Middle East now. And we can go live to our own international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's in the southern Israeli city of Ashkelon. Dominic, what is the latest where you are?
Well, the latest here, Trevor, is we're in Ashkelon, as you say, just a few miles north of Gaza. What we're hearing here is quite a lot of big Israeli guns firing shells into Gaza in response to attacks that Hamas launched on this city and others. They hit a medical centre here overnight after the patients had been moved from there, fortunately, but also hit a residential area as well. I think more worrying for the Israelis is what's happening to the east of here, southeast of here, in Sderot, in Be'eri, in Ofakim, these towns on the outskirts or the edges of Gaza. But Ofakim's quite deep into Israel, 15 miles or so. In those towns, we understand that the Palestinian militants are still holding hostages and in some places reportedly sort of patrolling the streets. So more than 24 hours into this operation, Hamas still controls part of Israel, which is an unprecedented situation for the Israelis, an extraordinary challenge to the Israeli military. The Israelis say they are confident they can deal with that threat. They are now launching air offensives, so artillery strikes, fighter jets attacks on Hamas targets in Gaza. And they say a ground operation is imminent. Now, we've seen Israel launching these kind of ground operations and attacks to deal with the Palestinian threat in the past, but they now have a very different enemy to deal with, an enemy that's proven itself to be an effective fighting force that can erupt from Gaza, break through the fence, and in multiple places launch attacks on Israeli civilians and soldiers, dancing on Israeli tanks. Extraordinary pictures we've seen, but also now melting back into Gaza, most of them, and taking with them scores of Israeli hostages. And that, I think, is the huge challenge for Benjamin Netanyahu and his commanders as he ponders what to do next. How do you go in and deal with the Hamas threat while they are holding so many Israelis hostage? An unprecedented situation for the Israeli government that they've never dealt with in their history.
Dominic, thank you very much. We'll be hearing from you through the day, I think. Stay safe. Now, let's hear from the government. I can speak to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper. Good morning, Mr. Harper.
Good morning, Trevor.
Many of our viewers will have relatives in Israel. What can you tell us about the safety of British citizens in Israel right now? We've already heard from the Israeli ambassador that at least one British citizen is in Gaza.
Well, look, first of all, let me just say we'll have all been horrified by the barbaric scenes that we saw with Hamas's indiscriminate attack yesterday, and we are unequivocally in support of the state of Israel as they deal with that threat, and they have the absolute right to defend themselves. On the subject of British citizens, we're obviously working very closely and have been in contact with the Israeli government about any British citizens that are in Israel, and we'll obviously continue to work with them and obviously get information and work with their families back here in the United Kingdom.
Is there travel advice that you need to give to the public?
Yes, I'm not going to give it here on air. I would refer people to the Foreign Office website on Gov.uk because that information is kept up to date and up to the minute based on the latest position. And of course, my department is working closely with airlines that fly to Israel, working with the Israeli government on the position there to make sure we keep people safe.
OK, thank you. Can we turn to your own responsibilities as Transport Secretary now? Now, last week, your leader spoke several times about long-term decision-making, which to most people would imply some kind of bipartisan agreement on, for example, HS2. What would you like to hear from Sir Keir Starmer this week?
Well, on many subjects, but including on HS2, it would be nice if the Labour Party had the same position one day to the next. We made our position very clear last week. The Prime Minister set out why we had changed our position on HS2, which is because the facts have changed. The costs of the project have gone up significantly, and the benefits have reduced partly because of the change in travel habits. So we're taking every penny that we've saved and we're reinvesting that in other transport infrastructure across the country, in the north, in the Midlands and elsewhere, to projects which actually we think better fit what people need.
I'd like to come to all of that, but I asked you what you'd like to hear from Sir Keir Starmer, and if I may say so, I don't think it's the best invitation to the opposition party to join you in an enterprise to start by telling them that they're flip-flopping. I mean, isn't there an invitation here to join you in a common cause?
Well, look, Keir Starmer's had multiple different positions on HS2, and I listened carefully to what the Labour deputy leader said yesterday. She had a different position, saying that she wanted to carry on building HS2. Now, we've set out our position clearly, which is that we want to take every penny that we're saving and reinvesting it in those transport projects. It's for others to decide what they want to do. If they don't agree with us and they want to carry on building the second phase of HS2, then they need to tell people whether they want to cancel those other transport projects. So look, I would urge everyone to do what we've done, which is to put the national interest first, make the decision that we have. We think that's the right decision for the future, and we look forward to campaigning on that in the general election, to winning that election and delivering on those commitments. All
right, well, let's test your claim to clarity here. you've launched this idea of a new network north that's supposed to soak up this 36 billion quid that you've freed. If I can just ask you very quickly for some yeses and nos on some things. Is the Bradford station going to be built?
Yes, it is. We were very clear about the promise for Bradford, £2 billion for the station, the line. I was in Bradford last Thursday with the leader of the council, the Labour leader of the council, the West Yorkshire mayor, and they welcomed our commitment to that investment in Bradford.
All right, that is admirably clear. Let me ask you about another one. The Leamside line, which your roads minister, you said last week was going to happen. Your roads minister said since you're just looking into it. Who's right?
Well, what we're doing is we're going to develop the business case for that, but we've made a big commitment to the North East elected mayor for a significant amount of money, I think £1.8 billion, and it'll be for them to decide how they spend that money, and they obviously have Leamside Line as one of their priorities, and the incumbent in that position set that out last week.
OK, that's an amber on that one. And let me ask a third one. Is the Euston Station development going to be built even if there is no private money?
No, we've been very clear. We want to get Euston built. We're going to take away the delivery of the station from HS2 Limited. We think it's much better if we have a more ambitious development plan for Euston, have a development corporation to build thousands more houses, more business development, and also private investment.
And are you guaranteeing it's going to be built?
That's what we want to deliver. Well, look, we think we've got...
You want to, but are you guaranteeing it's going to be built?
We've just had... Well, look, we've just demonstrated with the development of Battersea and Nine Elms. We got £9 billion of private investment into that scheme, including to develop the extension to the Northern Line underground. We think that's the right model to save the taxpayer money and deliver quality public infrastructure.
OK, good. But you can see why I'm a bit bothered about clarity here. You're very clear on your first answer, but your second answer, Leamside, is depends on what Tracy Babin thinks. And your third answer is, well, we've done something like this before, so maybe we'll... You can see why people are a bit anxious about it. You announced that there'd be a Manchester Metro extension, which, by the way, had already been built. You announced contactless ticketing.
On that,
already announced in 2021. The point I'm really making here
on the Manchester Airport, the Manchester Airport extension is an extension. It already goes to one terminal. It's now going to go to the next terminal. So that's actually a new project.
OK, so it's an add-on. It's an add-on. But you see what I'm saying here? That on all of these things, there's a level of ambiguity which you want from your opponents, but you're not necessarily delivering yourself.
No, I don't think there's anything ambiguous at all. We've taken every penny of the savings from HS2, £36 billion, and we've set out how they're going to be spent in the parts of the country where HS2 is going to be spent. So most of it, two-thirds going to the north, £10 billion going to the Midlands, and the savings from getting private investment into Euston elsewhere in the country. I think that's very clear, and happy to be judged on it.
There's one question which the Prime Minister didn't quite answer in his speech last week. He said he took his decision because the facts had changed. On July the 17th, you tweeted that HS2 would connect our largest cities, which must include Manchester and Birmingham, because they're the second and third or second, and it would create tens of thousands of jobs. You said that on July 17th. What actually happened in 11 weeks between July 17th and last week? What facts changed?
Well, two things. First of all, of course, we are still committed to delivering HS2 from Euston to Birmingham. That's not an insignificant project. That's a huge project, huge amounts of public money to deliver a big capacity increase, and it will still take 30 minutes off the journey time between London, Euston and Manchester, for example.
But you knew that in July.
First of all, we're still building that.
July.
The second, so the second point is that we are seeing increasing cost pressures on delivering HS2, and the decision for the Prime Minister and myself was whether we wanted to sign up to those increasing
My point is you knew all that in July.
Or whether it was right to reinvest it. Well, no, there's been increasing cost.
Did you not know that in July? Did you not know that there's this vast overrun in July?
We did, But we've had further work done by the company, and at some point you have to say, do we continue spending more money on a project where the benefits have reduced because of the different way people now travel? Business and commuter traffic is down by a half, for example, on the railways. Leisure travel is up, but business and commuter traffic, which was such an important part of the plan,
forgive me, we have heard that.
And you make that decision.
Forgive me, we are running out of time, but it seems to me that it wasn't the facts that changed, it was your mind that changed. And there's no dishonour in saying that. You knew all of this in July. You just changed your mind. Why not say that?
Well, no, look, I think the pressures on the finances have actually changed over the summer. And we've looked at the facts, we've worked through all this information, and say when the facts change, you make a different decision.
Mark Harper, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks very much, Trevor. Thank you.
But now let's go back to our panel. Jackie Smith, Anne McElvoy and Aisha Hazarika. Well, that was interesting. Anne, what do you make of that?
Well, that's quite a hard gig for Mark Harper, isn't it, on a Sunday morning?
It's his job.
It is his job. I was going to say what is hard for him to explain is why there was no kind of obvious road to this reversal that even a few weeks ago, as you were pressing him in your mischievous way, was that he was able...
Moi? Yes, mischievous?
Toi. But I think that is difficult to explain. I think the other thing that is unclear here is the state of the Euston development. It might sound like a bit of a London story, but in fact, it's very big because also everything that flows from it, like the purchases, the compulsory purchases that followed from that decision to have this real huge commitment, and it was a big commitment, which is why those who were behind it, you saw David Cameron come out this week very angry with Rishi Sunak for backing off it. It's almost like you dug the big hole in the ground, you caused all the disruption, and now you've changed your policy. Now, in fact, I have some sympathy because there has been such a big cost overrun, but it was known previously, and I think had the Conservatives been thinking more clearly, they would have created a bit of a road to this decision. They would have sent out more signals earlier rather than pulling the plug in this messy way that happened last week.
Well, I mean, the whole thing was extraordinary. We were all in Manchester last week. The idea that this, I mean, by the way, this story was running for about 15, 16 days. They end up bungling this announcement. You have Andy Street doing an impromptu press conference. And all of this is done, by the way, in an old railway station. I mean, you couldn't make it up. But in terms of the politics, I think Anne is right. Look, if Rishi Sunak, when he did his net zero speech, had said to people, look, I've looked at the costs, I'm making a strong choice now. Instead, it's all dribs and drabs and then coming out in the conference speech. And the other politics of this, their big attack line against Keir Starmer is you're a really bad person for changing your mind, cut to the biggest U-turn on, let's be honest, the biggest flagship infrastructure project of the Conservative administration. So I think they've completely blunted this argument about U-turns and flip-flops.
Jackie, you've had the experience of being a minister, having to come out on Sunday morning and do this. Do you feel just a bat squeak of sympathy for Mark Harper?
Well, as you say, it's his job. So, yes, I feel a squeak of sympathy, but they got themselves into this mess, frankly. And let's not forget, this week in Liverpool, Labour will be talking to an extent about the way in which the country is broken and they want to rebuild it. There is no better sign of that, frankly, than if you travel on the trains between the West Midlands and London, as I frequently do, get booted off early, the trains are running late, the capacity isn't there. There was the opportunity, decided, of course, under the last Labour government, supported up to this point by this government, to actually build some of the infrastructure that other countries take for granted and we need in this country, and they blew it.
Jackie, let me take you on to Wes Sweeting's interview. Now, you're now the chair of a big health authority. This overtime proposal, £2 billion for reform in a £200 billion a year budget. It feels, sorry, it's £1 billion for the overtime, but it's even less. It feels to me a bit like he's coming to a knife fight with a plastic picnic spoon.
Well, I mean, you pushed him rightly on the challenges of workforce, which is one of the main concerns that we have in the NHS at the moment, although Labour have, of course, as well, push the government on the workforce plan and put some money behind expanding the NHS workforce. But the other area that this is all focused on, of course, is absolutely the right place, which is the NHS is underinvested in terms of its technology, its digital capacity, its beds to an extent. But this focus on improving the diagnostic capacity in the NHS is exactly right in order to cut
It completely makes sense, and you know people talk forever about the prevention and so on. But realistically, you know, you're chair of a health authority. Are you going to be able to say to people, "Oh, by the way, we've got a lovely new scanning machine. The only problem is we need you to work an extra 5 hours a week"?
Well, I mean, of course that's a challenge, Trevor, because before we even get to that point, we have to try to get control of the waiting lists, which have ballooned again because of the industrial action that we're currently facing. I mean, I think Wes made a fair point that we do, of course, in the NHS, have a bank system in which our staff are able to provide extra work. He's focusing on the right area. Workforce is the challenge, but there's investment going in there as well.
And can he do it?
Well, I mean, at least he's showing that he is trying to deal with the figures, I think, in it's a bit of an elastic way, as you're suggesting. But I think what he has to start doing is looking like Labour could come in...
I love that, an elastic way.
It is the way spending departments do these things. But where I do think he's onto something is that even though it's sort of at the sharp end of it and you're running a health trust, you can question whether this is doable. But I think it was quite important for Labour to stop speaking generalities about the NHS, to lose the kind of sacred cow ambience around it and start saying, look, here's this amount of money we're going to put towards this workforce flexibility. It's easy to say it's not enough. It's never going to be enough. But at the moment, I think Wes Streeting is leading the argument about healthcare reform, and that's quite interesting, given it was really a Conservative issue.
Okay.
I do think that actually he's having a reasonable time on that. He's going to come under pressure on the figures.
OK, more chat from our panel a little later. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking to Sharon Graham. She's the boss of Labour's biggest union, donor, Unite. The problem is she doesn't seem that impressed by the Labour Party's leadership.
I'm going to keep Labour's feet to the fire. Of course I want a Labour government. I absolutely want a Labour government, of course. But I want a Labour government that is going to make real change to people's lives. And I think at the moment, Labour are being too timid.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Five of us have made it out of the car. welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Welcome back. This is Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Now, it wouldn't be a Labour conference without some internal battles, but with the party seemingly set for government, the mood is buoyant, as you'd expect. Some, though, think Keir Starmer might be playing it a bit safe. As we arrived in Liverpool, I was joined by Sharon Graham, the General Secretary of Unite, the country's biggest union. Sharon Graham, this weekend you've accused the Labour leadership of miserable managerialism. Is there anything that Keir Starmer could say or do that would convince you that a Starmer-led government won't just be warmed over Blairism?
Well, look, I'm the leader of a trade union. I'm the leader of a trade union, so we're not a branch of the Labour Party. I run a union, and my absolute fundamental job when I wake up in the morning is to deliver for working people. And so if it's uncomfortable for me to be raising issues like the renationalisation of energy, investment in steel, oil and gas, then I'm not embarrassed by that because that's my job to do it. So I'm going to keep Labour's feet to the fire. Of course I want a Labour government. I absolutely want a Labour government, of course, but I want a Labour government that is going to make real change to people's lives. And I think at the moment, Labour are being too timid.
Ah, well, I want to come to all of those points, but one of the things that you said in both the article you wrote this weekend and one that you wrote a month ago, that you questioned whether Labour is... what side is Labour on? Now, here in Conference Centre, we're full of corporates. There are more corporate stands here than there were at the Tory party conference. Are you sure Labour is on the side of working people still?
Well, look, for me, I want them to be more on the side. We've just had 13 years of Tory rule, and it's been absolutely abhorrent what's happened to people. People are actually just merely existing. And I want Labour to come in and now bat for workers and their communities. We've had 13 years of Tories batting for big business and batting for the rich. This is the time for Labour to come in and bat for our side, bat for workers and bat for communities.
I know that's what you want, but what I'm trying to get at is how confident you are incoming Labour government will be the sort of Labour government that you'd want. Now, Peter Mandelson, who's one of the architects of New Labour, I'm sure you're familiar with him, is going to make a speech this week in which he'll say, we gather, we have to make higher levels of private investment the foundation of everything else we would want to achieve. For example, in the role Labour's proposed National Wealth Fund will lever in and partner private capital. Do you agree that that's fundamental?
Well, look, what I think is we've tried a lot of that before, haven't we? I'm really pushing at the moment at this conference for the renationalisation of energy. And we thought that it was the right thing, the Tories actually, but we haven't reversed that it was the right thing to have energy in private hands. That has meant we've got astronomical bills. It means we've got no control over a key asset. It means that the French people have lower bills because EDF own their own energy. And I often think we are in favour. Labour is in favour of nationalisation as long as it's another country owning it. I mean, what we've got to do now is to say what are the different choices we can make that mean that the workers and the communities in Britain, they can feel a Labour government. That's the thing for me. Of course I want Labour to get in. I'll campaign for Labour, but I want them to count. I want to be able to feel a Labour government like we did in 1945.
Well, let's talk about some of the things that would make you feel that it's your kind of Labour government. Let's talk about the nationalisation. You've been pretty clear that you want electricity and gas in public hands. You're the dominant union in the other energy sector, which is oil.
Yes, yeah.
Would you like Keir Starmer, when he speaks this week, to say, maybe not tomorrow, but one day we are going to nationalise BP?
Well, look, what I want him to say is that he's going to do something. I want him to say that actually we are on this journey, we're on this path. And part of that, and there are sort of three things that I'm really talking about this week. One is on the privatisation and the renationalisation of energy, so to take it out of private hands. The other is in relation to workers' rights. And of course, we have the issue around steel. We have a steel industry on its knees and we need proper investment in steel. So I'm here this week. Normally I wouldn't be here, actually, Trevor. Normally I'd be on a picket line or negotiations.
That's very unusual.
I wouldn't normally be here.
Your predecessors would always turn up at Labour Party conferences.
My job is to fight for workers. That's the job that I have. I'm here for some of this week because we're at the business end now. We're at the business end. We're affiliated to Labour and we're at the business end. And I want to say really clearly they need to put a better offer on the table for workers. Now, I think, obviously, I hope they win. I want them to win. But there's a difference between limping into number 10 and being actually carried in there to say, look, actually, this person's got to come in and they're going to back for us.
I'm trying to get from you what would actually constitute that. And I really want to pin you down a little bit on this. What do you want Labour to say about public ownership of oil and gas?
Well, at the moment, we're talking about energy, and so we're prioritising because we're prioritising. And I'm the trade union leader of a union, and my members make decisions of what it is they would like us to say on these things. We had a conference in July, and the energy members said they wanted their industry to be renationalised.
You want BP to be nationalised?
That's not what I've said, Trevor, is it? You're putting words into my mouth. What I've said is that I take my lead from my members. And the priority that we're looking at the moment are two things, because you're not going to get everything. And one is steel and one is energy. Now, the wider issue that I would say to you...
So you do want steel to be brought back into public ownership?
Well, what I think about steel is that we should have a stake in steel. We are in a serious situation of steel where effectively this industry is literally on its knees. We could be the green steel capital of Europe. This country could be in the green steel capital of Europe if we invested well. Why give that investment and not have a stake? And so there's a conversation about that. But the wider issue for me that I'm asking Labour to do, the much wider issue, is about choices. We are a £2.5 trillion economy. So let nobody tell me that we can't afford to renationalise energy at £90 billion. We're a £2.5 trillion economy.
You want the Labour Party to commit to spending £90 billion renationalising the electricity and gas.
Well, but let me just talk you through that, because
you're quite specific in your documents.
I'm very specific. So basically, £90 billion, but that is an asset on our books. So it's not like you drink a pint down the pub and it goes away. It's an asset on our books, and we're a £2.5 trillion economy. If we made different choices, we'd have different outcomes, and that is the point that I'm trying to make at the moment. That, for example, if you said that 1.5% on everybody who had over £10 million in this country, over £10 million in assets, that would bring in £17 billion a year. We're currently doing a paper, because nobody's talking about this, on what other choices can be made.
So is that what you mean when you say in your document, I've looked at the Unite document, and I know you've got a report coming on this. Is that what you mean by progressive taxation? That you want wealth now to be taxed at a higher rate? You want more money off essentially middle-class people?
Well, look, what we're looking at is a whole range of things, and Unite's got an area called Unite Investigates, and we were the ones that brought out the profiteering report. We were the ones that showed that the Governor of the Bank of England saying, tighten your belts, don't ask for a pay rise because it will cause inflation. Actually, there was huge profiteering on the other side of that was causing inflation.
One last political question. One of the MPs that you supported as a union for a long time now sits as an independent MP, not a Labour MP, Jeremy Corbyn. If he decides to fight Islington North as an independent, will you be supporting him still?
Well, we couldn't do that, Trevor, because obviously our union's rule book is that we're affiliated to Labour. And if you're affiliated to Labour, it's just happened in July that our union reconfirmed its affiliation by a vote, a very strong vote, by the way, by a vote. And of course, Labour's rules are that if you supported an independent, you would be expelled. And therefore, that decision isn't a decision because our members made that decision.
So no support
when
for
we've
Corbyn?
effectively, well, the support is for the Labour Party because that's what our rule book says that we do.
Look, it's the very last point. What we've been talking about is the kind of Labour government you'd like to see. Would you prefer a Labour government that will make Peter Mandelson happy or another government of another colour?
I want a Labour government, let's be really clear. And quite frankly, I saw that Peter Mandelson was saying Labour should be bolder as well. That was someone who agreed with me that I didn't expect. I want Labour to be bolder because if they're bolder, we can really deal with what's happening in society. Let's do what it says on the Labour tin. Let's go in and be Labour.
Sharon Graham, thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor.
Coming up, this man who knows a lot about getting Labour back into power. He did it once with Tony Blair and New Labour. So what does Peter, Lord Mandelson, make of the current crop? Welcome back. This is Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Next year, Sir Keir Starmer will bid to become just the second Labour politician born in the last century to win a general election. We all know who the first was, Tony Blair. The new Labour project brought his party out of the political wilderness with a stonking landslide, a feat the current leader is trying to replicate. At the heart of that project was the man once labelled the Prince of Darkness, Lord Peter Mandelson. He joins us now. Peter, you heard my interview with Sharon Graham. How did it feel to be in bed, I'm speaking politically, with Sharon Graham?
Look, I agree with Sharon Graham. We need more than policy tweets.
Oh, blimey, let's stop the show now. We've got the headline.
You've got the headline.
Peter Mandelson and Sharon Graham.
Hold on.
A new alliance.
Hold on. I agree that we need more than policy tweaks and we need more than small twists of the policy dial. Yes, I'm happy to be bold, but not bold and stupid. Okay?
Oh, so you're not going to be campaigning for the nationalisation of Centrica and BP?
Do you know what I'm going to be campaigning for? I'm going to be campaigning for a Labour government that's going to invest in home insulation that will create energy security and efficiency in people's homes. I'm going to be campaigning for a Labour government that's going to get British workers building electric vehicles. I'm going to be campaigning for a Labour government that's going to get steel workers making green steel, not passing £96 billion worth of public funds to the shareholders in BP and other energy companies. OK, so now you know what bold and stupid is. Bold, yes. Stupid, no.
Let battle be joined. Let's talk about you and not... I don't want to spend all my time refereeing you and Sharon, but let's talk about you. We've been talking, discussing, arguing about politics. I think we discovered 50 years now.
We are indeed, both of us, older than we look.
Indeed. But as ever, even somebody who knows you isn't absolutely sure what you're up to. Mystery surrounds you. Exactly what role are you now...
I'm completely transparent. What do you mean?
What role are you playing in the Labour Party's affairs right now? Are you advising the leader?
I am doing anything and everything I can, not my day job, help Keir Starmer, help his team, and get Labour back with as big a majority as we can achieve. That is what I'm doing.
So you're actively... Have you seen the draft of his speech for Tuesday?
No.
OK, all right. So now you're not part of the inner circles, but you're advising him to be...
I'm way out on the fringe somewhere.
OK, you're advising him to be bold, so does Sharon. You're not going to be doing the same thing. I want to talk to you about what you think boldness means. Wes Streeting told me this morning that, he's already said that the Tories have laid waste to the NHS. He's got this idea about scanners, 170 million, overtime for staff and so on. Do you think that really matches up to the task? Labour's telling us we've got to build a massive new block of flats, and they're giving us 2 bricks and a trowel.
Yeah, no, in the first instance, yes, I think it does add up. I mean, you've got to look at every single part of the public financial budget and see where you can switch spending in order to make a difference.
But I'm talking about the scale of ambition.
However, in the medium and long term, you've got to do far more. Now, what Wes, Keir Starmer have said about the National Health Service is that it's not just got to be got up off its knees, it's got to be transformed. And in my view, it's going to be transformed principally by 2 things. First of all, making it less of a sort of hospital bed based, cure you and do your best when you've got ill, to a preventative primary healthcare focused system that stops people getting so ill in the first place. Secondly, the use of data, which is being generated in huge quantities, and its use in diagnostics and in other areas of healthcare, is going to transform the National Health Service in the medium and long term. Now, that's going to take investment, and that has to be built up properly. But creating that sort of direction of travel, for the NHS and other public services is as important as making an immediate difference to public services by switching spending wherever they can.
But you, when you came in 1997, you had money. There was growth coming. This Labour government won't have any money. because there isn't any money left. And I'm trying to get from you what you think would represent the scale of change that really would transform the NHS. What are the kinds of things that would make it completely different? For example, more private sector involvement?
West Streeting has made it absolutely clear. You know, if we can sort of, as it were, pay for and commandeer private healthcare in order to meet the needs of NHS patients, so be it. Look, needs must. You've got to take a very pragmatic approach to these things. But Trevor, you do put your finger on a really important point compared now with 1997. In 1997, when we were campaigning with Blair and Brown, the British economy was growing. What they had to do was to put their feet firmly down on the economic accelerator. Compare now.
Can't do it.
We've basically got to jumpstart, restart the entire economy. It's a completely different kind and scale of economic challenge that we're facing now. And
surely that demands even more radical action.
And the reason why I am such a strong supporter of what Starmer is saying and doing on the economy is, first of all, because he recognises that, and he knows that of the 5 big policy missions he's set for the Labour Party and the next Labour government, economic growth is the most important. He knows that, in a sense, only a government can create the economic and political stability that we need in order to win the confidence of markets to finance public investment. But also he knows that we have got to transform. Now, hold on. This is important. We've got to transform the attractiveness of the British economy and the whole business environment in this country in order to win the global race for private investment. Now, that's a big difference between now and when we were coming into office in 1997. In 1997, things were relatively good, or they're certainly better than they are now.
When you came in 1996, you had a lot of what I think the Labour MP Chris Mullen called cost-neutral policies. Independence of the Bank of England, Human Rights Act, House of Lords reform, 50% of school leavers in higher education, which were not big public spending commitments, but did transform institutions and the way things operated. We're not seeing any of that from Labour at the moment, are we?
Well, I don't agree with you. I mean, let me give you a couple of examples. The planning system in this country and the time it takes to get permission to do anything, to build anything, a business, an infrastructure, a science park or whatever, is the biggest single brake on our economic growth. And reforming that and overhauling that is a massive and very challenging and difficult thing to do. That's not costless, but it does not involve vast sums of public money.
One last quick sentence. You're getting married in two weeks' time.
End of this month.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
What can Keir Starmer say on Tuesday that will give you a wedding present?
He can continue to do what he's already doing at the moment, and that is to sort of bring the Labour Party across the line from being weird to being normal again, which he's done very successfully. And secondly, he can give this country what it needs, its future back, with a stonking great British Labour Party majority at the next election.
OK, very good. Absolutely on message. Absolutely. In just a moment, on a busy morning in Liverpool, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Extremely successful journey, especially for the kids. And I couldn't be more proud of them. That's why in this series, I think it's real interesting to watch that progression and kind of how this all happened and where they're at today. I don't have any regrets with my family. Why? Because they know how to handle it. They've been doing this since the beginning, I mean, for a long time. And they've had the highs, they've had the lows. They've learned a lot. They know more than I do. I mean, they're out there all the time. They're very sharp. So, and because of that, They've built tremendous businesses.
They did rather well, didn't they? Because one's a supermodel and now one's a billionaire. So you must be extremely proud of your girl.
Well, I got two billionaires right now. And I think the third one's probably on the way.
On their way, 3 billionaires.
Yes, they're creeping in. I can't tell you which one, but yeah. Trans women should not be competing in women's sports, bottom line.
If you'd have transitioned when you were at the height of your career, what would you have done, do you think?
I never would have done that. I wouldn't. No, I never would have. You got to I realize that if you're going through a transition, you're going through that. There's some things you can do and some things you can't do. Okay? You can't say, I am not this trans person that goes, I am a woman and, you know, everybody else just quiet down, you know, and you better use the right pronouns. And I am not that. Okay? I'm not even close to that. Okay? I am a young person. I'm a person that suffered from gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is real, okay? It is real. And it needs to be treated in your own way. But it's very small. There's very few people in the country that really are truly gender dysphoric. And, but I suffered with it my whole life. If you had a chance to read my book, Secrets of My Life by Caitlyn
I know
Jenner.
it's from being a small
and
child.
I go through the whole thing, the sneaking around, the lying, the behind closed doors, everything. And I suffered with this my whole life. I raised families and suffered with it, and on and on and on. And I finally got to the point in my life with dealing with gender dysphoria that here I was, like 65 years old. I had done this my whole life, that I'm sick and tired of this, you know. I got to live my life. All my kids are raised. Everything's done.
Five of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Back to our panel now. Anne McElvoy, Jackie Smith and Aisha Hazarika. I've just been talking to Peter Mandelson about, you know, we're both ancient. And both of us can remember the days when, at Labour Party conferences, big trade union leaders would stalk the halls and everybody would be quaking for their next utterance. Now, Sharon Graham's been pretty direct. Do you think Keir Starmer will be hearing her voice more loudly than that of Peter Mandelson's, or the other way around?
Well, there was quite a bit of consensus between them, I thought, wasn't there? And
I
the
know.
point about...
Maybe I should be a peacemaker. Maybe somebody...
I think that's more of a sign that people are utterly serious about getting a Labour government, actually. And Sharon Graham has always taken the approach as a union leader of focusing on her industrial relations role more than her sort of political kingmaker role. And given the challenges for working people, that is probably the right thing for her to be focusing on.
Aisha, I'm quite disconcerted by this whole peace and harmony at Labour
You're not
thing.
happy, are you? You're not happy by the whole thing.
There's no
Trevor
fun.
Phillips, it's not. Where's the fun? But look, this is not a time for sort of fun. Look, this is the first shot, the first serious shot that Labour has at power. And look, we all, particularly Jackie and I, will have the scars on our back. And if you think about where the party was in 2019, getting absolutely smashed at the ballot box, many people were thinking it would possibly be 10 years, even more, before Labour was competitive again. But to the point about the unions, I think what is interesting is we've just, before conference season kicked off, we had the TUC conference. And what was interesting there is, look, there wasn't total agreement over everything, but there was a consensus that everybody is going to toe the line to get Keir Starmer over the line. And also, Sharon Graham's very different from her predecessor, Len McCluskey. He was much more political. You know, he wanted to kind of meddle in the sort of, you know, the inner workings of the Labour Party. She's actually delivering. She's doing quite a good job delivering. And the other thing which is important to note is, yes, the union income is very important to the Labour Party, that link between, you know, Keir Hardie, it's hewn out of the Labour movement. But let's not forget the number of private donations which are coming into the Labour Party as well. The unions are
They've
not
just had
the
$3
only...
billion from Lord Sainsbury.
Exactly. And there's another chap, Gary Lungworth, he's a very, you know, Labour's now getting so much money in coming from business, coming from... It's not like they're not kind of held to ransom by the unions in the way they might have been done in the past.
And, you know, I don't want to cause trouble or anything, but I'm wondering how long this is going to last. Somebody said on Sky the other night that Labour's pursuing, this is my word, a Jurassic Park strategy. You know, if you don't move, T-Rex won't spot you. Can you stop breathing for a whole year? I mean, something has to give, doesn't it?
You would think so, wouldn't you? But at the moment, if you look at the position on industrial relations, I would suggest it's still the government that's under more pressure there. You saw Rishi Sunak digging in. He was particularly talking about junior doctor strikes and the NHS and saying, you know, we are not going to go any further than we have gone. I think for Labour, it's probably Jurassic may be a good position. Now, there's a difference between Jurassic, to mix the metaphors, and putting your head in the sand. And I think what will happen between the unions, and it is interesting that Sharon Graham is here prominently, as a lot of trade union people say to me, it's interesting that she's engaged very much at all, because it was the case that there were some union leaders who sort of liked to be around in Labour world, and a lot of others, and Sharon, I think, was one of them, who liked to really keep arm's length and almost suggest that this form of the Labour Party was not to her taste. That gap, I think, is closing in order to try to get Keir Starmer elected. I think on strikes and industrial relations, there will be pressure on Labour. But right now, I would say it is going more towards the Tories, and that may be why we're all going Jurassic here.
OK. Aisha, Peter Mandelson demonstrated a very old-school message discipline.
I know.
Surely not.
We were like, this is a masterclass in, like, taking the line.
Yeah, he did the job. But Labour can talk to itself and love each other and all the rest of it, but it's got to get votes from outside there. And one of the things, going back to 1997, that I think everybody would acknowledge is that there was some sense of anticipation, some kind of excitement. You know, in Wes Streeting's own book, he says 1997 was a moment when Labour, you know, he got thrilled by Labour. Let's get the future back. Are you feeling a tingle?
A crackle in the air. Well, look, I don't think conference slogan is the thing that's going to, like, massively move the needle on this. What is really clear, though, is I think, for me, the most interesting thing that Peter Mandelson said was bold but not stupid. You know, we all know the metaphor about the Ming vase across the highly polished floor. This time it's on an ice rink with one ice skate on, you know. The stakes are very, very high. So I understand, as a former strategist and advisor, I understand the caution. But a time is going to come as we approach the short campaign where there is going to have to be a bit more courage. And I think the thing that I'm struck by, if this is going to be a change election, Labour does need to set out what that change is going to be.
Jackie, I don't want to go on about slogans, but you will remember then the great slogan, forward, not back. You were a cabinet minister then. I mean, what's Labour got to do to get people to be excited and love it?
And what's more, of course, I was elected in 1997, and I do remember a conference call with Peter Mandelson where he was running late, and we listened to Things Can Only Get Better on a loop for half an hour, waiting for him to arrive, to deliver us the message, which always was, when people are bored, when you're bored of the message, the public are just getting it. Aisha's exactly right. There needs to be a bit more of a retail offer, but there needs to be a sensible approach to government, and that's what we've been seeing this morning and this week.
Thank you all. That's it for this morning. Join us next week for Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Next week, the SNP are in Aberdeen. They'll be licking their wound after Rutherglen, no doubt. Still a force to be reckoned with. Stay with us.